I never thought a strip of orange electrical cable would turn me into the neighborhood villain. But that's exactly what happened the day Patricia Carmichael from the HOA spotted the heat tape running along my roof edge. My name is Paul Jensen, and I had just moved to Pinewood Heights, a planned community outside Boulder, Colorado, 6 months earlier. The house was perfect. 3 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, and a backyard that faced the mountains. What I didn't realize was that the homeowners association had rules for literally everything, including apparently how you were supposed to prevent ice dams from forming on your roof during winter. It was early November when I installed the heat tape. I'm an engineer by trade, so I researched the hell out of it first. Colorado winters can be brutal, and the previous owner had mentioned he'd had problems with ice damming the year before he sold. Ice dams form when heat from your attic melts snow on your roof, which then refreezes at the edges, creating a dam that backs water up under your shingles. The damage can be catastrophic. A $300 investment in heat tape seemed like a no-brainer compared to thousands in potential roof repairs. I spent a Saturday afternoon carefully installing the heating cable along the eaves and in the gutters, following the manufacturer's instructions to the letter. The orange cable was visible, sure, but it was designed that way for safety reasons. You needed to be able to inspect it and make sure it wasn't damaged. I felt pretty good about myself when I finished, grabbed a beer, and went inside to warm up. 3 days later, I found the notice tucked into my front door. "Dear homeowner," it began in that passive-aggressive tone that all HOA letters seem to have. "It has come to our attention that you have installed unauthorized exterior modifications to your property without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Specifically, orange electrical cabling has been affixed to your roofline in violation of Section 7.3b of the Pinewood Heights CC and advocacy, which states that all exterior modifications must maintain the aesthetic harmony of the community and receive written approval before installation. You have 10 days to remove this violation or face a fine of $250 with an additional $100 per day until compliance is achieved. Please contact the HOA office to discuss this matter." It was signed by Patricia Carmichael, HOA president. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the CC and advocacy, those covenants, conditions, and restrictions that you supposedly agree to when you buy a house in an HOA community. I spent 2 hours reading through the dense legal language. Section 7.3b did exist, but it was clearly written with things like painting your house purple or building a shed in your front yard in mind, not reasonable winterization measures. The next morning, I called the HOA office. A chipper woman named Denise answered. "Hi, I'm Paul Jensen over on Maple Ridge Drive. I got a letter about heat tape on my roof." "Oh yes," Denise said, her voice losing some of its cheerfulness. "Patricia specifically wanted me to tell anyone who called that the policy is firm. The heat tape has to go. Can I at least talk to her about it? This is a legitimate safety measure to prevent ice dams." There was a pause. "She's actually in the office right now. Hold on." After a moment, a crisp voice came on the line. "This is Patricia Carmichael. Miss Carmichael, I'm Paul Jensen. I just wanted to discuss this heat tape situation. I installed it to prevent ice dam damage to my roof. It's a standard winterization technique in Colorado. Mr. Jensen, I'm aware of what heat tape is. However, it's unsightly and violates our community standards. Pinewood Heights maintains a certain aesthetic that keeps our property values high. Bright orange cables running along roof lines simply aren't acceptable. But the alternative is potentially thousands of dollars in roof damage, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Not to mention the safety hazards. Ice dams can cause massive icicles to form, which are dangerous for anyone walking below. Then perhaps you should have ensured your attic was properly insulated, Patricia said coldly. Prevention through proper home maintenance is always preferable to these unsightly band-aid solutions. The fine stands. You have 9 days remaining. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, absolutely stunned. I'd dealt with bureaucracy before, but this was something else. This was a power trip disguised as civic duty. Over the next week, I did my homework. I talked to my neighbors, most of whom were sympathetic but terrified of the HOA. I learned that Patricia had been president for 7 years and ran the association like her personal fiefdom. She lived in one of the larger houses near the community clubhouse and seemed to spend her days prowling the neighborhood looking for violations. She fined me $500 because my trash cans were visible from the street on a Tuesday, my neighbor Mike told me over his fence. I'd forgotten to bring them in after Monday pickup. $500 for that. Why doesn't anyone vote her out? I asked. Mike laughed bitterly. You think anyone wants to run against her? Last person who tried, she made their life hell. Found violations for everything imaginable. They ended up selling and moving away. I also discovered that Patricia had recently pushed through an assessment to build a new clubhouse. The old one was perfectly fine, but she wanted something grander. Each household had been charged an extra $1,500. The new clubhouse was scheduled to be completed in January, and Patricia was apparently very proud of it. On day 9, I made one more attempt. I printed out articles from structural engineering journals about ice dam prevention, manufacturer specifications for the heat tape, and documentation of the previous owner's ice dam problems. I drove to the HOA office, which was temporarily housed in the old clubhouse while the new one was being finished. Patricia was there, along with 2 other board members. A nervous-looking guy named Richard and a woman named Susan, who seemed to exist solely to agree with everything Patricia said. Mr. Jensen, Patricia said when I walked in. She was exactly what I'd pictured, mid-50s, perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive athleisure wear, and a face set in perpetual disapproval. Your 10 days aren't up yet. I wanted to present my case before you fine me, I said, staying calm. I laid out my research on the table. This heat tape is a recognized and recommended prevention method for ice dams. The previous owner had damage from ice dams. I'm taking responsible action to protect my property. Patricia didn't even look at the papers. Mr. Jensen, I don't care if the President of the United States recommends heat tape. It's orange, it's ugly, and it violates our community standards. End of discussion. Then let me paint it, I said. I can paint it to match the gutters. Absolutely not. That would void the manufacturer's warranty and create a safety hazard if the paint covers any damage. I did my research too, Mr. Jensen. She smiled triumphantly. The heat tape comes down or you pay the fine. Those are your only options. I looked at Richard and Susan. Richard stared at the table. Susan nodded along with Patricia. This is unreasonable, I said. This is the rule, Patricia replied. You agreed to follow our rules when you purchased your home. If you don't like it, perhaps Pinewood Heights isn't the right community for you. I left before I said something I'd regret. The next day, day 10, I came home to find another notice. This one informed me that I was now being fined $250 for the initial violation, plus an additional $100 per day starting tomorrow. I had to either remove the heat tape or pay up. I called a lawyer. She told me what I already suspected. Fighting an HOA is expensive, time-consuming, and usually futile. Their CC and Articus gave them broad authority, and judges generally upheld that authority unless the HOA did something egregiously illegal. Charging me for an aesthetic violation, even an unreasonable one, wasn't illegal. You could remove it and sue for any ice dam damage you sustain, arguing that you were prevented from taking reasonable preventative measures, she suggested. But that's also complicated. Your homeowner's insurance might not cover it if you knowingly removed protective equipment. I was trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare. That evening, I sat on my deck with a bourbon, staring at the mountains. Snow was already accumulating at the higher elevations. The weather forecast called for a heavy winter. I thought about removing the heat tape and taking my chances, but that felt like letting Patricia win. I thought about paying the fines, which would add up to thousands of dollars over the winter. I thought about selling and moving, but I loved this house. In the end, I made a decision that was probably stupid but felt necessary. I left the heat tape up and told the HOA I wouldn't be paying their fines. Patricia's response was swift. The fines started accumulating. $250 for the initial violation, then $100 per day after that. By December 1st, I owed over $3,000. Patricia sent certified letters weekly, each one more threatening than the last. They could place a lien on my property. They could take me to court. They could foreclose. Let them, I told Mike over the fence. I've documented everything. If this goes to court, a judge is going to see how unreasonable this is. Man, I hope you're right, Mike said. But Patricia doesn't lose. She always finds a way. Winter came hard that year. By mid-December, we'd had 3 major snowstorms. My heat tape worked perfectly. The heated cable kept my eaves and gutters clear, preventing ice buildup. Water drained properly. My roof was fine. I couldn't help but notice that other houses in the neighborhood weren't as lucky. Ice dams were forming on multiple roofs. I saw Mike up on a ladder one Saturday, chipping away at ice in his gutters. "Be careful," I called to him. "That's dangerous." "I don't have much choice," he yelled back. "If I don't clear this, it's going to back up under my shingles." I also noticed that the new clubhouse was progressing nicely. It was a large building, much bigger than the old one, with a fancy architectural design that featured dramatic roof lines and extensive guttering. It looked expensive. Patricia was often there, supervising the construction crew and no doubt making their lives miserable. The week before Christmas, we got hit with a massive storm. 2 feet of snow fell in 3 days, followed by a brief warming trend, then a hard freeze. It was perfect ice dam weather. My heat tape continued to do its job beautifully. But as I drove through the neighborhood, I saw disaster forming everywhere else. Huge icicles hung from gutters. Ice dams were visible on nearly every roof. Water stains appeared on siding as backed-up snowmelt found its way into walls. And then I saw it, the new clubhouse. The building's dramatic roof lines, which looked so impressive architecturally, were a nightmare in practical terms. Ice dams had formed all along the lower roof edges. Massive icicles, some 4 or 5 feet long, hung from the gutters. Even from the street, I could see water staining on the siding. I slowed down as I drove past, almost mesmerized by the spectacular failure of design. Someone honked behind me and I continued home, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. 2 days after Christmas, the weather warmed up slightly, enough for the ice to start shifting. I was working from home when I heard sirens in the neighborhood. Curious, I walked down toward the clubhouse. A crowd had gathered. The road was blocked off. And the new clubhouse looked like it had been attacked by a giant. One entire section of the roof had collapsed under the weight of accumulated ice and snow. The ice dams had prevented proper drainage, causing water to pool on the flat sections of the roof. That water had frozen, adding tremendous weight. When the temperature rose slightly, the ice had shifted, and the structure had failed catastrophically. The damage was stunning. The collapsed roof section had crashed into what looked like the main gathering room. Broken glass and twisted metal littered the ground. Water poured from broken pipes. The building that Patricia had been so proud of was a disaster. Patricia herself was there, standing amid the chaos, talking frantically on her phone. Her face was pale, her perfect hair disheveled. She looked like someone whose world was ending. How could this happen? I heard her say to someone, maybe her insurance agent. It's a brand new building, it shouldn't. Yes, I understand, but no, there's no heat tape or any preventative measures. Why would we need? It's supposed to be properly designed. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. I should have felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad. This disaster had been completely preventable. Over the next few days, the full scope of the damage became clear. The roof collapse had destroyed about 30% of the interior. Water damage from the melting ice and snow had ruined flooring, drywall, and electrical systems throughout the building. The construction company denied responsibility, saying they'd built to code, and that the HOA should have included ice prevention measures in the design. The insurance company was investigating, but indicated they might not cover the full cost, since the damage resulted from inadequate winter protection, which could be considered a maintenance issue rather than a covered peril. The projected repair cost was over $400,000. I learned all this because Patricia called an emergency HOA meeting 2 days after New Year's. Every homeowner received a notice stating that attendance was mandatory to discuss a critical financial matter. The meeting was held in the community center of a nearby neighborhood that had agreed to let us use their space. Over 200 people showed up, cramming into a room meant for maybe 100. The mood was tense. Patricia stood at the front, flanked by Richard and Susan. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past week. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice lacking its usual authority. "As you're all aware, the new clubhouse has sustained significant damage. We're still working with insurance, but the preliminary estimates suggest we'll need to do a special assessment to cover repairs and completion of the building." A murmur ran through the room. "How much?" someone called out. Patricia glanced at Richard, who pulled out a document. "Based on current estimates and the number of homes in our community, we're looking at approximately $3,000 per household." The room erupted. People were shouting, standing up, demanding explanations. Patricia tried to talk over the chaos, but it was useless. Finally, Mike stood up. "You already charged us $1,500 for this building. Now you want $3,000 more for a disaster that could have been prevented." "The construction company built to code," Patricia said defensively. "This was an unprecedented weather event." "Bull," someone else shouted. "This is Colorado. Heavy snow and ice aren't unprecedented. They're normal." I stood up. The room quieted down a bit, maybe because people knew about my ongoing battle with the HOA. "Patricia," I said, keeping my voice level, "did anyone recommend ice prevention measures during the design phase?" She glared at me. "The building was designed by professionals." "That's not what I asked. Did anyone recommend heat tape, heated gutters, or any other ice dam prevention?" "Those measures are unsightly and not in keeping with our community standards," she snapped. "The same standards I've been trying to enforce with you, Mr. Jensen, despite your continued refusal to comply." "My house is fine," I said quietly. "My roof is fine. No ice dams, no damage, because I installed heat tape that you've been fining me for." The room went dead silent. The situation with your personal violation is separate from this matter, Patricia said, but her voice had lost its edge. Is it? I asked. You've been fining me $100 a day since mid-November for installing the exact prevention measure that would have saved the clubhouse. How much do I supposedly owe you now? $6,000, $6,450, Patricia said tightly. And yes, we will be pursuing collection. I pulled out my phone and brought up the photos I'd been documenting. I have pictures showing ice dams on the clubhouse starting December 20th. I also have photos of my house with the heat tape visible and no ice dams. I've documented everything. What's your point? Patricia demanded. My point is that this disaster was entirely preventable, and you let it happen because you valued appearance over function. And now you want us to pay for your mistake. The room erupted again, but this time the anger was directed entirely at Patricia. People were shouting questions. Why wasn't ice prevention included? Who approved the design? Where was the oversight? How could this happen on a brand new building? Richard and Susan looked like they wanted to sink through the floor. Patricia tried to regain control, but it was impossible. Finally, she announced that the board would reconvene and provide more information at a later date. Then she practically fled from the room. The next week was chaos in Pinewood Heights. A petition started circulating to recall Patricia and the entire board. People who had been silent about the HOA's overreach for years suddenly found their voices. The Facebook group for the neighborhood, previously filled with mundane announcements, and the occasional lost pet post, became a forum for angry homeowners demanding accountability. I stayed somewhat out of it, but I did consult with my lawyer again. She was intrigued by the situation. You might actually have leverage here, she told me. If you can demonstrate that the HOA prevented you from taking reasonable protective measures, while simultaneously failing to implement those same measures on common property, resulting in significant financial harm to the community, you could argue that they've breached their fiduciary duty. What does that mean practically? I asked. It means you might be able to get your fines dismissed and possibly even sue for damages if your case is strong enough. More importantly, it gives you negotiating power. I thought about that. I didn't really want to sue anyone. I just wanted to be left alone to maintain my house responsibly. But I also didn't want to pay $6,000 in bogus fines. 3 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mr. Jensen, this is Patricia Carmichael. I almost dropped the phone. Miss Carmichael, there was a long pause. I wanted to speak with you about your situation. I'm listening. Another pause. The board has been discussing the various challenges facing the community right now. We're trying to find solutions that work for everyone. Okay. Your heat tape installation, while not technically approved through proper channels, has clearly been effective in preventing the exact type of damage that occurred to the clubhouse. The words sounded like they physically hurt her to say. We're willing to retroactively approve your installation and waive the fines you've accrued. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In exchange for what? We'd like to consult with you on ice prevention measures for the clubhouse and possibly other common areas. Given your engineering background and your obvious research into this matter, we think you could provide valuable input. I almost laughed. You want me to help you fix the problem you created after fining me for solving it, Mr. Jensen, please. Patricia's voice cracked slightly. I know we haven't seen eye to eye on this, but right now, I'm trying to minimize the financial impact on every homeowner in this community, including you. The truth is, if we can demonstrate that we're taking active measures to prevent future damage, our insurance situation improves. And if those measures don't cost a fortune, we can reduce the assessment amount." "How much of a reduction?" I asked. "If we can get the insurance to cover more and implement cost-effective prevention, we might be able to cut the assessment in half or better." "That's $1,500 back in your pocket, along with the $6,000 in fines we'd waive." I had to admit that was significant money. "I want the waiver in writing before I agree to anything." "Of course, I can have something drafted by tomorrow." "And I want the CC and Articus amended to explicitly allow heat tape and other ice prevention measures for individual homes." There was a long silence. "That would require a vote. Given the current mood of the community, I think it would pass," I said. "Don't you?" "Yes," Patricia admitted. "Probably." "Then those are my terms." We agreed to meet the next day. Patricia sent over a draft waiver that evening, which my lawyer reviewed and approved with a few modifications. The next afternoon, I sat in Patricia's living room, a surreal experience after months of conflict. Her house was exactly what I'd expected: immaculately decorated, expensive furniture, and everything in its place. We sat at her dining room table with the waiver between us. "I want you to understand something," Patricia said as I read through the document. "I've been president of this HOA for 7 years. In that time, I've worked hard to maintain property values and community standards. That's not a small thing." "I understand that," I said, "but standards have to be balanced with practicality." "I know that now." She looked tired. "The truth is, I got caught up in the appearance of things. I wanted Pinewood Heights to look perfect, to be perfect. I thought that was my job." "Your job is to serve the community," I said, "not to rule it." She flinched at that but nodded. "The recall petition has over 60% of homeowners signed already. The board will be gone within a month regardless. I'm trying to fix what I can before that happens." I signed the waiver, and she countersigned it. Just like that, $6,000 in fines disappeared. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Patricia, Richard, and a contractor to design an ice prevention system for the clubhouse. We used heated cables along all the eaves and in the gutters, exactly like what I'd installed on my house. We also added heat trace to the downspouts and installed additional roof ventilation to reduce heat buildup in the attic space, which would minimize the freeze-thaw cycle that caused ice dams. The total cost for materials and installation was about $8,000, far less than the clubhouse damage. More importantly, we documented everything and presented it to the insurance company, showing that the HOA was taking active measures to prevent future damage. Combined with the fact that the construction company agreed to share some of the repair costs after all, and the insurance company covering more than initially projected, the special assessment dropped to $1,200 per household. People were still angry about paying more after the initial $1,500 assessment, but $1,200 was a lot more palatable than $3,000. The vote on the assessment passed, though barely. At the same meeting, the CC&R amendment explicitly allowing ice prevention measures passed with 92% approval. Several homeowners installed heat tape on their houses within days. The recall vote happened in early February. Patricia, Richard, and Susan were removed from the board by a landslide. New members were elected, including Mike from next door, who had found his courage after all. The clubhouse repairs took until May to complete. When it finally reopened, it included all the ice prevention measures we designed, plus better attic insulation and ventilation. It actually looked pretty good, and the heat tape wasn't nearly as noticeable as Patricia had claimed it would be. Most people didn't even see it unless they looked for it. As for Patricia, I saw her around the neighborhood occasionally. She'd nod to me, and I'd nod back. We weren't friends, but the anger had faded on both sides. She'd learned an expensive lesson about flexibility and humility. I'd learned that sometimes standing your ground, even when it's difficult and expensive, is the right thing to do. One Saturday in late May, I was working in my yard when Patricia walked by with her dog. She stopped at the edge of my driveway. "Your roof looks good," she said. "Thanks. No damage at all this winter. I wanted you to know that I'm moving. I've accepted it's time for a change." "Where are you going?" I asked. "A condo in Denver. No HOA, ironically enough." She smiled slightly. "I think I'm done with community governance." "That's probably for the best," I said, not unkindly. "For what it's worth, you were right. About the heat tape, about priorities, about all of it. I let my ego get in the way of common sense." "We all make mistakes," I said. "The important thing is learning from them." She nodded, called to her dog, and continued her walk. I watched her go, feeling something like closure. The following winter, the new HOA board sent out a memo in October encouraging homeowners to consider ice prevention measures before the snow started. They included links to resources, and even negotiated a group discount with a local contractor for anyone who wanted professional installation. It was a complete reversal from the previous year's approach, and it made all the difference. That winter was even harsher than the previous one. We got hit with storm after storm, and the temperatures stayed below freezing for weeks at a time. But Pinewood Heights was ready. Most homes had some form of ice prevention installed. The clubhouse weathered the season without any issues. People helped each other, sharing tips on snow removal and ice management. My heat tape continued to work perfectly. Not a single ice dam formed. My roof remained undamaged, and every time I looked at that orange cable running along my eaves, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd won some petty battle, but because I'd stood up for what was right and reasonable, even when it was difficult. Mike and I became good friends. His stint on the HOA board gave him a new perspective on community management. "It's harder than it looks," he admitted one day over beers. "But the key is listening to people and being flexible." Patricia never learned that. "She learned it eventually," I said. "Just the hard way." The legal threats the HOA had made about liens and foreclosure never materialized. Once the fines were waived, there was nothing to pursue. My lawyer sent them a strongly worded letter outlining the potential liability the HOA had exposed itself to, which probably helped encourage their cooperative attitude during the clubhouse repairs. I also learned more about the financial situation that winter had created. The total cost of the clubhouse disaster, even with insurance and shared responsibility from the construction company, had exceeded $700,000. The special assessment only covered part of it. The HOA had to take out a loan for the rest, which would be paid off through slightly increased annual dues over the next 10 years. Every homeowner in Pinewood Heights would be paying for Patricia's rigid aesthetic standards for a decade. That knowledge made me grateful I'd fought back when I did. If I'd given in and removed the heat tape, my house might have sustained serious damage, and I would have been paying for both my repairs and the clubhouse disaster. Instead, my house was fine, and I'd only had to pay the $1,200 assessment. In March, I ran into Denise, the woman who worked in the HOA office. She was at the grocery store, and we ended up in the same checkout line. "Mr. Jensen," she said warmly. "How are you?" "I'm good, Denise. How have things been at the office?" She laughed. "So much better. The new board actually listens to residents instead of just dictating rules. It's night and day." "I'm glad to hear it." "Between you and me," she said quietly, "Patricia made that job miserable. I had to deliver so many ridiculous violation notices. I felt terrible about it, but I needed the job." "I understand. You were just doing what you were told." Thank you for saying that, and thank you for standing up to her. A lot of us wanted to, but we couldn't risk it. You changed things for the better." That conversation stuck with me. I'd thought of my fight with the HOA as a personal battle over my property rights, but it had been bigger than that. It had been about accountability and common sense in community governance. By refusing to back down, I'd inadvertently sparked a change that benefited everyone. The story spread beyond Pinewood Heights, too. A local news station picked it up as a human interest piece about HOAs and winter home maintenance. They interviewed me, showed footage of the clubhouse damage, and talked about the importance of balancing aesthetics with practical concerns. The story went viral online, getting picked up by news aggregators and HOA reform websites. I got emails from people all over the country dealing with similar HOA issues. Most of them were just looking for advice or moral support. I tried to respond when I could, always emphasizing documentation, knowing your rights, and being willing to stand firm on reasonable positions. One email came from a woman in Minnesota who was being fined for having unauthorized roof ventilation visible from the street. The ventilation was preventing ice dams. I sent her the documentation from my case and the contact information for my lawyer. 6 months later, she emailed to say her HOA had backed down and amended their rules, crediting my case as a precedent. By the time autumn rolled around again, Pinewood Heights had settled into a new normal. The board was functional and reasonable. Community events were well attended. Property values remained strong, proving that you didn't need draconian enforcement of aesthetic rules to maintain a desirable neighborhood. I'd learned a lot that year. I'd learned about HOA law, ice dam prevention, and community politics. But more importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the right fight is worth fighting, even when the costs seem high and the outcome uncertain. Standing up to unreasonable authority isn't easy, but it's necessary. Patricia's house sold in September. A young couple with 2 kids bought it. They introduced themselves to the neighbors and seemed nice. When the husband mentioned he was thinking about installing heat tape for the winter, I offered to help him. We spent a Saturday afternoon running heated cable along his eaves, and I showed him how to properly secure it and connect it to a thermostat. "I heard you had issues with the old HOA president over this," he said as we worked. "Ancient history," I replied. "The current board is much more reasonable." "Good to know." My wife was worried about HOA drama when we bought the house. "There's always going to be some drama when you have a few hundred households," I said. "But as long as the people in charge are reasonable and willing to listen, it's manageable." That evening, looking at his properly installed heat tape, I felt like things had come full circle. What had started as a personal conflict had become a teaching moment and ultimately a positive change for the entire community. Winter came again, as it always does in Colorado. The snow fell, the temperatures dropped, and ice tried to form on roofs throughout Pinewood Heights. But this time, the community was prepared. Heat tape glowed orange on house after house. The clubhouse sat warm and dry, its heating systems humming efficiently. No disasters, no damage, no panicked emergency meetings. I stood on my deck one February evening, bourbon in hand, watching the snow fall. My heat tape was doing its job. My house was warm and safe. And somewhere in Denver, Patricia Carmichael was probably enjoying her condo with no HOA rules to enforce or defend against. The whole experience had cost me time, stress, and $1,200 in special assessment fees. But it had also taught me about standing firm on principle, about community responsibility, and about the importance of common sense in governance. Those were valuable lessons, worth far more than what I'd paid to learn them. Mike came out onto his deck next door, saw me, and raised his own glass in a toast. I raised mine back. We didn't need words. We'd been through the trenches together, metaphorically speaking, and had come out the other side. The next morning, I checked my mailbox and found the usual assortment of bills and advertisements, but no violation notices, no threatening letters, no certified mail from the HOA. Just normal life in a normal neighborhood with a functional homeowners association that had learned to balance aesthetics with practicality. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year and a half. The initial installation of the heat tape, Patricia's violation notice, the escalating fines, the clubhouse disaster, the emergency meetings, the recall vote, and finally the resolution. It had been exhausting and frustrating, but in the end, it had made the community stronger. The new board had implemented other changes too. They'd created a clearer process for requesting variances to the CC and Articus for practical modifications. They'd started a community newsletter that actually communicated useful information instead of just listing violations. They'd organized neighborhood events that brought people together instead of pitting them against each other. Property values in Pinewood Heights had remained stable despite all the drama, proving that communities don't need authoritarian HOAs to maintain desirability. What people really want is a reasonable set of standards enforced with common sense and flexibility, not rigid adherence to rules for the sake of rules. I also noticed that other homeowners had become more engaged with community governance. Meeting attendance was up. More people volunteered for committees. The recall and its aftermath had reminded everyone that the HOA worked for them, not the other way around. That was a healthy change that would benefit Pinewood Heights for years to come. One afternoon in early spring, as the snow was finally melting and the heat tape season was winding down, I was checking my roof and gutters when I noticed a car pull up. A man in his 30s got out, looked around uncertainly, then walked over. "Are you Paul Jensen?" he asked. "I am." "Can I help you? My name is David Torres. I'm looking at buying a house here in Pinewood Heights, and during my research, I came across the news story about you and the HOA and the clubhouse situation. I wanted to ask you directly, is this a good community? Should I be worried about HOA problems?" I climbed down from my ladder and thought about how to answer. "It's a good community now," I said finally. "We went through some growing pains, as you obviously know, but those growing pains resulted in positive changes. The current board is reasonable and responsive. The rules are sensible. If I had to do it over again, I'd still buy here. Even after everything you went through, especially after everything I went through, that situation forced this community to evaluate what kind of place it wanted to be. We chose to be reasonable and practical instead of rigid and authoritarian." "That's valuable." David nodded thoughtfully. "The house I'm looking at is a few streets over. The seller mentioned there used to be ice dam problems in the neighborhood. Some houses had issues, yeah, but most homeowners have installed prevention measures now, and the HOA actively encourages it. If you buy here and want help installing heat tape or other winterization, I'm happy to give you advice." "I appreciate that. Thank you." He bought the house 2 weeks later. True to my word, I helped him install heat tape that next fall. By that point, I'd become the unofficial neighborhood expert on ice dam prevention, a role I'd never expected but didn't mind. It felt good to help people avoid the problems I'd faced. Years passed. The clubhouse remained damage-free, its heat tape system requiring only routine maintenance. The loan the HOA had taken out to cover the disaster was being steadily paid down. New families moved in, and the story of the great HOA ice dam disaster became part of Pinewood Heights lore, a cautionary tale told to new board members about the importance of practical governance. I stayed in my house, enjoying the community I'd helped shape through my stubborn refusal to back down. My heat tape ran along the eaves year after year, that orange cable a visible reminder that sometimes function matters more than form, and that standing up for what's right, even in small ways, can create ripples of positive change. Looking back, I never regretted installing that heat tape or fighting the fines that followed. Yes, it had been stressful and costly in terms of time and energy, but it had also been necessary. Patricia and the old board had needed someone to draw a line and say, "No more." I happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right issue to make that stand. The irony wasn't lost on me that a simple winterization measure had sparked such drama and ultimately such change. But maybe that's how these things work. Big changes often start with small stands on principle. One person saying this doesn't make sense and refusing to accept the status quo just because it's the way things have always been done. As I write this, another winter is approaching. My heat tape is ready to go, inspected and tested. The clubhouse's systems have been serviced. Throughout Pinewood Heights, homeowners are preparing their properties for the cold months ahead, installing prevention measures, checking insulation, and making sure everything is ready. And somewhere in some other community, someone is probably getting a violation notice for taking reasonable action to protect their property. Maybe they'll back down. Maybe they'll fight. If they fight, I hope they win. Every small victory against unreasonable authority makes it easier for the next person to stand up. That's what I've learned from this whole experience. Change doesn't happen in dramatic sweeping moments most of the time. It happens in small, stubborn stands on principle. It happens when ordinary people refuse to accept unreasonable demands just because they're backed by official-sounding authority. It happens when someone is willing to be temporarily unpopular to do the right thing. The heat tape on my roof is more than just a winter protection measure now. It's a symbol of practical common sense winning over rigid bureaucracy. It's a reminder that homeowners associations, despite their broad powers, ultimately answer to the people they're supposed to serve. And it's a testament to the value of standing firm on reasonable positions, even when doing so seems difficult or expensive. I've received countless messages over the years from people fighting similar battles with their HOAs. Solar panels, rain barrels, vegetable gardens, clotheslines, and dozens of other practical modifications that run afoul of aesthetic rules. Some people win their battles, others lose, but all of them are fighting the same fundamental fight: the right to use their property responsibly without arbitrary interference. The legal landscape around HOAs is slowly changing too. Some states have passed laws limiting HOA power over certain types of modifications, particularly those related to energy efficiency and environmental responsibility. These laws exist partly because of stories like mine, because enough people fought back and made noise about unreasonable restrictions that legislators took notice. That gives me hope. Change is possible, even when facing seemingly intractable systems of authority. It requires courage, persistence, documentation, and sometimes a willingness to become temporarily unpopular. But it can happen. Pinewood Heights is proof of that, so here I stand, years after that first violation notice, in a community that's better for the conflict we went through. My house is undamaged, my heat tape is still running, and the HOA has learned to balance appearance with practicality. It's not a perfect ending because real life doesn't have perfect endings. But it's a good ending, one that made the struggle worthwhile. And really, that's all any of us can hope for when we fight these battles. Not perfect outcomes, but good ones. Not complete victory, but meaningful progress. Not the end of all problems, but the solution to this particular problem, plus a framework for handling future challenges more reasonably. As winter approaches once again, I'll flip the switch that powers my heat tape, watch it begin to warm, and remember everything that simple orange cable represents. It's not just preventing ice dams. It's a monument to common sense, a testament to persistence, and a reminder that sometimes the smallest stands on principle lead to the biggest changes. Patricia learned her lesson the hard way, through public embarrassment and removal from power. The HOA learned its lesson through financial disaster and community backlash. I learned my lessons through stress and conflict, but we all learned, and Pinewood Heights is better for it. That's the real story here. Not just about heat tape and ice dams and an authoritarian HOA president. It's about how communities grow, how they learn from mistakes, and how they become better versions of themselves through conflict and resolution. It's about the importance of questioning authority when that authority makes unreasonable demands. And it's about the value of standing firm on principle, even when doing so is difficult and uncertain. So to anyone reading this who's facing their own battle with an HOA or any other form of seemingly unaccountable authority, take heart. Document everything. Know your rights. Stand firm on reasonable positions. And don't be afraid to fight back when fighting back is the right thing to do. Change is possible, even when it seems impossible. Pinewood Heights is living proof of that truth.